We'll see all the chickens. Some of the new guys. Henrietta, definitely the pack leader. Doing a bit of picking yet. I see what you're doing. A new little Delaware is getting picked on. But we're working it out. Everything in balance. Oh, Nelly. That's done. Every day. Trying to go outside, Bigu? Okay. Great outdoors. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. I've just been calling me Builder Bob. Just made that. I got this old clawfoot tub. I built this platform out of all wood that I found in the cheap section. It's like the damaged wood, 70% off. And I also built this. I have no idea what I'm doing, so let's talk about it. First, a little greenhouse tour. Still pretty cold here. We're getting like beautiful sunny days, and then it's like freezing nights, and sometimes it will just snow, and that's the way March and probably April will go. So I'm seed starting a bunch of stuff. As much as I could, I made out of reclaimed things. You know, I got all this pallets here. I did buy the 2x4s and the tarp and the PVC, but everything else is either reclaimed, or you can see places like Home Depot. I'll go and I'll just look. They have a section where it's like 70% off damaged wood, and I will get funky with it. So I just piece this together. What I like to do, kind of like cooking, is I just look at a million different things people are doing and kind of get a sense, and then see what I have, and then just get creative and just try to figure out what I'm doing. I've learned a lot about building in the last few months, from building a chicken coop to a greenhouse to some other things. I've been kind of obsessed. So I have some big water jugs that helps to regulate the heat. I have got, what have we got here? I have got this big box here. So maybe you've heard of square foot gardening. Now I invented something called square inch gardening. Basically, the concept of square foot gardening is this guy figured out, and he's got a whole book about it and a lot of information out there, and people love his stuff. But he figured out a way to garden with a lot less space, and it involves building these square foots, usually exactly 12 by 12, and you only need about 6 inches of soil. I have more. I have about 8 inches or so here. But the idea is that you're able to figure out, like, every square can have a certain amount of something. So like you can put like 4 arugula plants or 12 carrots, and that just helps you to maximize space, and you don't use as much nutrients because the blend that the guy uses is very specific. So I took some inspiration from that, but the way that I like to garden is I like to just place a lot of things. I'll seed a lot of stuff, or I'll put things, you know, that were seeded. Put things that I had in, like things like this, you know, these like 4 inchers, and then I will bring them into here, and I'll just kind of place things around, and then as they grow I can weed stuff out. So for example, I have a bunch of radishes here. If it seems like some are going to be really strong and big and some aren't, I'll just pick them off and, you know, have microgreens or things for my chickens, and then I can let the bigger ones grow. So I like to just kind of do more of a random method. There is an art to it, you know, like here you can see, yeah, there's an art to it, but it's just kind of this fun experimental thing, and you're really listening to nature. You're not just listening to what somebody else says. Get inspiration from people, but people only know so much. So I have a bunch of arugula here. So what's going to happen is that's technically way too much arugula for that space, for them to grow big like the guys over. So what I like to do is I'll let them grow, and then I'll thin out the microgreens, eat them as microgreens, and then I'll save the strongest ones and eat most of them. But the strongest one I will actually let go to seed, and then I'm getting seeds for next year, which seed collection is maybe the coolest thing ever. So okay, that's enough of the greenhouse talk for now. Well, at least showing you the greenhouse. So I'm going to talk about the greenhouse. So I have always had a dream of growing my own food, and it's interesting because on some levels You think about people like the hunter-gatherers. They weren't growing. They were just going around hunting and gathering stuff and just sort of using whatever the land provided. So I like to bring in elements of that. Aja and I do a lot of foraging. So, what foraging is, we basically go out into the woods and just find plants that we know how to identify. And of course, whenever you're doing that, you want to be safe. You don't want to just start eating things that you don't know what they are. Always go with professional. Make sure you know exactly what you're eating. I've made mistakes before. It's weird. It's scary. That being said, with anything in life, life is about growth, right? We're born, we grow, and then, as most people say, we die. Now, even if part of me is trying to make sense of that, because really, what is death? We don't know what death is. There are these things in life that people talk about, and that these assumptions that we make. And I just can't help it. I'm not trying to, but I can't not, sort of challenge these assumptions. Now, one example is for the Square for Gardening stuff. This guy was going around and he was asking everybody. His name is Mel. Mel's next. Mel. And he was asking all these gardeners. He was an engineer. He was retired. And he's like, why do you guys grow in this way, like these long rows, and why is there specific spacing? And most people's answers were, that's just the way we do it. And that's kind of how I look at life. When somebody says that's just the way it is, that's the way we do it. Even when I watch a lot of YouTube videos and notice that people tend to say a lot of the same things, it's just a reminder, like in cooking, when somebody of a professional or authority says something, it's usually just being passed down and regurgitated from person to person to person to person. Great example, and here comes a great music analogy. Tom York from Radiohead was talking about, they released an album, OK Computer, one of the best albums, one of my favorites at least. And the way they released it was in such a way that you had to listen to the whole thing straight through. And they would always just be creative. They basically sent everybody to cassette players with all the buttons except play taken out. So and the cassette player was locked. So you had to play it and basically listen to the album. And that was that. Now flash forward to when they did In Rainbows, and that definitely changed the music industry. It was like a pay what you want album that just came out of nowhere. And I was reading an interview, and he was talking about, from what I remember, that one of the reasons they do that is because typically with the way the record labels and everything is set up is a band puts out an album, but before they do that, they send it off to all the press people, and the press people get it, and usually one person writes an article, and then it seems like every other article is like a regurgitated version of that, because everyone, say Rolling Stones writes something, people don't want to necessarily go against Rolling Stones, so they kind of say the same thing. And he's like, I want people to be able to think for themselves, so they just put out the album. And the reason I love that is because everyone is unique in this world. We might all be connected, but we all have this unique situation that we're in. Case in point, I live in Colorado. There's very little gardening information on YouTube, which is where I learn a lot of stuff about not only growing in Colorado, but growing in the specific condition. I'm almost 6,000 feet. I'm on the side of a mountain. There's very little information about that. Now I can go to locals and I can talk to people and meet farmers, and I love doing that and making those connections. But at the end of the day, a lot of the information out there doesn't suit me, and also doesn't suit my philosophy, my way of being. So I need to figure that out for myself. And herein lies the intention of this channel. Aj and I are excited to do more homesteading. We're learning stuff every day. We're in that mindset. We've got the chickens, we've got the greenhouse, we have food growing, we're seeding, we're doing lots of stuff. We're making our own medicines, we're fermenting and doing all these different projects. And we're not trying to come as the expert. So if you're watching this, I'm not here to necessarily teach as though I know. It's not about that. To me, it's just sharing our life and what we're learning, and if something inspires you, great. But I'm not the expert. Only you can become the expert of your life. And granted, there's no place of perfection. There's no place where you're ever an expert. I'm always learning. I'm always growing. Even if I'm teaching, I'm still always learning, because every day something new becomes available to me. But never trying to come as any sort of authority or expert on this. But if what I'm doing inspires you, great. Because in life, we have time. And what we're doing in life is we're passing that time, right? So it's like, how do you want to pass that time? There's many different ways to pass the time in many different situations. So no matter what situation you're in, financially, economically, globally, whatever the situation is that you're in, mentally, emotionally, you can take that situation, you can look at it, and you can start to shift it based on looking at your assumptions of how things are supposed to be and maybe challenging those assumptions. Maybe you're somebody who's depressed and you just believe that's who you're going to be your whole life. For me, I've dealt with depression. I was told I had ADHD as a kid. Now, to me, one of the biggest things is gardening and building is like my ultimate, you have to slow down. If you look at my hands, they are battered and bruised. I had a cut on my face. I somehow whacked my freaking big nose on my car door, and I'm just constantly reminded, Yash, slow down. Slow down. So to me, this is the medicine. This is the practice. This is the meditation. I don't sit in meditation just to sit there and be. My meditation is being present, doing things. And sometimes that may look like laying in bed and thinking and processing and toning and these things. And other times it's seating and being present with the chickens and being present with the land. So I'm just constantly growing and shifting and changing and not trying to say like, hey, I've got it all figured out. Because life makes sense to me. And that's why you can check the link below if you want to read my books and go deeper into this philosophy. So much about life, it just makes perfect sense, but I'm still continually amazed, still continually surprised by how it unfolds. I understand that there's a natural rhythm to the universe, but it doesn't mean that how it physically manifests I always know until I go through the process and look back and be like, wow, that thing that was really frustrating or tough or challenging actually led me to this place. And that is the beauty of life and growth. So I'm going to end it there for now, but again, greenhouse, follow me on the journey, chickens, learning, and I'll see you soon.